Am I good? Hi, everyone. My name's Cody Miller. I am the Invasive Species Coordinator with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm also the chair of the Osceola SYSMA. And this evening, I'm going to talk to you guys about invasive species that we have here in Florida and give you a little background on what we have and what the problem is. So we'll get started and jump right into it. So before we get going into actually talking about invasive species, there's a couple terms that I think everyone really needs to be familiar with, just because in the conservation community, we use a lot of acronyms and not everyone is familiar with those. But we'll start by just defining what an invasive species is, just so we're all on the same page of understanding of what I'm talking about. So it's a species outside of its natural range that forms self-sustaining, expanding populations within a new within its new range. And then so that's the general description, and the federal description actually goes on, or the executive order that was done a few years ago goes on to say that it's whose introduction does or is likely to cause harm, either economic or environmental or human health related. So that's the overall definition of an invasive species, and that's really what we're going to be working with. We'll go talk about that term a couple more times this evening, so if you need reference, don't worry, we'll hit it again. EDRR, that's an acronym for Early Detection Rapid Response. This is a term that we use to talk about species that are maybe new to the region and how we want to respond to them, which is to find them early and respond quickly to that invasion. It's much cheaper to manage something early on than to manage something farther down the road. FLEPPC is the next acronym that we're going to have that I will talk about, which stands for the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. This is an organization that exists in Florida, and we'll talk about that later on. And then the final one is SYSMA. I already used this one. This is a cooperative invasive species management area. So there are 17 of them throughout the state. Osceola County is a single county SYSMA, and basically it's a group of individuals who work with invasive species, whether these are government employees, NGOs, private citizens. We all come together and we talk about invasive species issues, because you can't just exist in a bubble when it comes to invasive species. You have to work with your partners across the fence. So just keep those terms in mind as we go through, and as we go through, I'll make sure to re-explain them when they come up. So if anyone joins us later on, they may not know. Okay, so one of the things that's really confusing about invasive species is the idea of invasives versus non-natives and exotics. So these terms sometimes get used interchangeably. I will say they are semi-interchangeable, and we'll talk about that in a second. But a non-native plant is basically the first part of the definition of an invasive plant or animal. It's something that is outside of its native range. So maybe it comes from somewhere else, either on purpose or by accident. And that basically, in its new area, it's non-native. And it's important to note that not all non-native species are considered invasive. A good example of this would be the picture there, crepe myrtle. Everyone has these in their yard. They're not native to Florida, but they don't actually do anything other than exist in your yard and put out flowers. A subset of non-native plants do become invasive, and this is where you get into those plants that they are outside of their native range, and then they're capable of forming these self-sustaining communities, and then they expand. So basically they're able to produce, reproduce and expand without human interference, and specifically within our natural communities. So if you have a plant in your yard that is going crazy, that doesn't particularly mean it's going to be an invasive in our natural communities. That just means it really likes your yard. So today, when we're talking about invasive species, we're going to be talking specifically about plants that are a problem in natural areas within Florida. So not yard pests. I mean, they can be a yard problem, but really plants that are disrupting our ecosystems. And then again, there at the bottom, it has a negative impact on the habitat or the species in that habitat. And again, the good thing to note is that all invasive species are non-native, but not all non-native species are invasive, if that makes sense. So Invasives are just a subset of that non-native category. Okay, so just to put this in a little more perspective, so this is sort of the very general species that we have in our ecosystems. So on the left, you see the picture of the scrub jay. These are going to be your threatened and endangered species. Those are the species that are going to have regulations for protection, the species that we want to protect. They're going to drive a lot of management decisions throughout the state of Florida. You have species of special concern. This may be something within your specific community that you're managing that is a species that may not be threatened or endangered, but for one reason or another is important to your particular ecosystem. Then from there, you have just your range of native species. These are going to be the species that make up our native ecosystems in Florida. Here in Central Florida, examples of this would be like saw palmetto, things along those lines, things that make up the structure of our ecosystems. Then you have this next category, which gets into the weeds, so to speak. You have your non-desirable natives. Again, this is going to be specific to managed areas. And something like this may be like dog fennel or some of the morning glories, things that are just, they are ruderal or they're not attractive or they're really aggressive. So we'll talk about this in a second. That's a bit of a gray area. So then we get into your non-native species. These are going to be species that aren't native to Florida. Again, they're not all bad. Most of them, there's about, I think, around 1,500 species that they know of that are non-native to Florida that exist sort of just on their own, but most of those don't cause a problem. But a subset of those do become non-native invasive species that can move into our natural areas and cause problems. You can see the picture there of that bright green grass that is Kogan grass. We will talk more of that later on. That is a major invasive species in the state of Florida and really throughout the southeastern United States. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit. And one of the things I want to talk about is the way that people talk about plants and the way that people talk about things that they may think that they like or that they don't like, and some trigger words that you may start to hear that people say that may give you an idea of whether they're talking about a non-native or invasive or a native. And so I have some lovely words thrown out here over the screen over top of a lovely picture of Natal grass, which is an invasive in Florida. And I hear these terms all the time used, and a lot of them interchangeably, a lot of them incorrectly, but that's not the fault of people who are using them. It's just the way that they conceptualize. I mean, if you're not a plant person working with plants, then you don't particularly know. You use the terms that you know. So these are some of the terms, just some of them that I happen to know that are out there. Okay, so we have these terms. So how do they stack up? Okay, so we'll start with the two categories. There's the good category, native, and there's the bad category, which would be invasive, invasive exotic, and invasive non-native. It'd be great if everyone just used those terms. Unfortunately, they don't. And there exists this lovely gray area in the middle that has a whole host of different terms. And these are things that I've heard. This isn't like some official list. These are just terms that I've heard people use. And you'll actually see on the top is native, because I have a ton of people, I know a ton of people who will use this term to describe anything that they've seen in Florida for a long time and just associate it with the state of Florida. I'm not going to throw out any controversial species like, say, coconut palm, but that's one of them. Non-native, that's another species, that's another term that people use sort of maybe not correctly. It's a good indicator that maybe they're going in the right direction if they're talking about a species they don't know. Naturalized, exotic, and you may think like, oh, you're saying that's a bad, but I'm using this in terms of like, oh my God, it's exotic and beautiful. So I started my career in Florida in the Florida Keys. These next two terms specifically come from South Florida, exotic and tropical. When I hear the term exotic, I think bad. When other people from, say, Ohio, which is where I'm from, use the term exotic, they're thinking of, laying by a pool with a palm fan, fanning them and drinking a mojito. So different perspectives. The next one is tropical. Again, a lot of people use this. Oh, it's so tropical. It's so Florida. Okay, so those are kind of your your interchangeable good, bad. And then weedy, native. If you see something described as an aggressive grower, especially for folks that are planting things in their yard, maybe think twice about that one. Aggressive grower in Florida means extremely aggressive grower. That's the best thing that I can say about that. So these are just some terms that I've heard thrown out there, and it's good to know sort of where they are in the spectrum of talking about plants. Okay, so we've seen this slide before of where things sort of line up, but you may be asking yourselves right now, well, this is all well and great, Cody, but where do I find out what plants I should be caring about in the invasive species community? You know, what plants are invasive, which we'll talk about some of those later. But if you were looking for information on your own, where would you find this information? And it just so happens that we have a couple great places where we can find this information. And I'll talk about these each individually in the next couple of slides. But we have a noxious weed list and a prohibited species list. Those are going to be federal and state lists. We have FLEPPC category 1 and 2s. Those are on a list. We'll talk about those. And then we have an assessment tool. And all three of these tools, all three of these lists or tools, whatever you want to call them, are really good ways to get information about invasive species and find out the species you should be caring about, that you should be avoiding planting either in your yard, or you should be looking for and notifying people in your natural areas when you're out about, or that if you happen to see someone selling them, it's literally illegal. So we'll talk about that here. So the noxious weed list and the prohibited plants list. So the noxious weed list is a federal regulatory list. There exists a list of plants out there that are federally regulated. In Florida, things like Kogan grass, Brazilian pepper, Lygodium, those are all federal noxious weeds. In Florida, we also have a prohibited plants list. So everything that's on that federal list is going to be on our state list as well, but our state list has other species that aren't federally regulated. But what does this mean? So basically, you can't sell any of these plants in Florida. You can see the actual regulation there. Under no circumstances will these species be permitted for possession, collection, transportation, cultivation, or importation. And these are most of these plants that are on these lists you don't want anyways. Even if they're the most beautiful plant in the world, you don't want them, because even beauty can become too much sometimes. None of them are pretty, just so you know. And then, so in Florida, the organization that manages that list is FDACS, or the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Sciences, and they're freshfromflorida.com, so you can find that information on their website. And the federal noxious weed list, if you cared to go down that rabbit hole, is managed by USDA. But for the purpose of Florida, really check out your prohibited plants list, because that's going to be your closest to home list as far as species that are actually regulated. The next thing is going to be your most comprehensive list, probably in the state of Florida, and that's the FLEPPC plant list. This is FLEPPC, the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. I threw that term out there originally. This group is considered sort of the authority on identifying invasive plants and then putting them on this list. Once something goes on the list, it never comes off. Their website is fleppc.org. You can get a copy of this list directly on their website. You can print it off as a PDF. This list is non-regulatory. It doesn't have any regulatory regulations, so it doesn't prevent you from planting them, growing them, anything like that. But all those prohibited and noxious weeds will be indicated on that list. It's delineated out into category 1 and category 2. So category 1 are going to be these known ecosystem changing, disrupting species. And category 2 are it's called a to be watched list. So basically these species, either they have a limited range within Florida, or we think they're going to be bad. They just haven't been here long enough to be really bad. Maybe they're aggressive in other places, or they're they cause problems in other places, but not here yet. So that's our category 2 list. And then you can also look at it. It's broken out regionally. So there's an indication next to it whether it's a problem in North, Central, or South Florida. So you can actually look at you can sort of if you so care, ignore everything else on the list. I'll show you here in a couple slides, but little spoiler alert, most of the plants on that list are actually invasive in Florida. I think we only get away with about 30 of them that aren't invasive in Central Florida. So you might as well care about all of them. And then just to throw another acronym out at you guys, FLEPPC is actually in the process of changing their name. So over the next couple of years, you will see a change from FLEPPC and the FLEPPC plant list and FLEPPC.org to FISC, which is an invasive species council. And really the only reason this group is changing their name is to keep current with both the terminology when we talk about these types of plants, and also stay consistent with similar groups throughout the country. Because one of the hardest things is, as I showed you earlier, that people have a hard time talking about invasive species in a consistent way. So having consistency in the way that the community, the invasive species community, talks about ourselves is important. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the IFAS assessment tool. So this was a tool that was adapted from a tool they have in Australia, and originally this was brought in to sort of assess the invasiveness of plants before they came to Florida, or if people wanted to import them. They've also gone back through and done all of our known invasive species so far. But what it's being used for now is actually an IFAS tools and sit in that that wheelhouse out of UF. And it was developed to ensure consistency with extension recommendations. So there was, it was basically just sort of county by county who was recommending what, and they decided to use this tool to create consistency amongst what all the extension agencies could recommend to be planted in your area or in your yard. And on the right side of the screen, you'll see a little you'll see the circle with the snapshot. That's actually what you see when you get on that assessment.ifas.ufl.edu. And where it says type here to search for species name. The thing that I absolutely love about this tool is you don't have to know the scientific name. You can know any one of the multiple common names. If you don't even know what the name is and you just maybe have an idea of what the family is, you can type something in there and it will give you a list. The other thing that is great, you can also hit, you see where it says in orange, view all assessments. You can also click that and just see everything. There's almost 1,000 entries into this database. But one of the things I love even more than that is that everything comes with a great picture. It's really frustrating when you're talking to someone about plants and they say, oh well, have you ever this, just check out this plant. I'm like, first of all, I don't know how to spell that. Secondly, I've never seen this plant before, so how do I know what I'm looking for? So one of the best ways, especially for people who don't work with plants, to identify a plant is a picture, and especially a picture of its most showy attribute, which would be its flowers. So you can go through here. They're listed alphabetically. They have great, very clear pictures, and if you click on any one of these, they give you a lot more information about that species. You can see that, so this is an old screenshot. So in this particular one, they only had 847 assessments, but I believe they're almost up to 1,000 now. There's only 2 people that work on this, so it does take them a time to get through it. But if you don't want to have to go through all the results, say you're in Central Florida, you can actually filter the results. If you, like I said, if you don't know what you're working with and you're just starting from scratch with all those assessments, you can break it down into what they know is in your region and then look at it from there. So you can look at just all of the species that they know could potentially exist in Central Florida if you wanted to. So this is a great tool. This is open to anyone to use it. I use it all the time to help me ID plants. Non-native plants. I'm sorry, my dog's going to start barking, so I'm very sorry about that. But this is a great tool, and I encourage everyone to use it if you're trying to figure out what this problem plant may be, whether it's in your yard or whether it's in your neighboring natural area. So that's my plug for the IFAS assessment. There's also a lot of other tools out there that you can use to help you identify what a plant is or get you help with that plant. And if you have more questions about that, contact Valerie. She has my contact information. She can get you in touch with me. The SISMA is another great way to get engaged with the invasive plant community if you have questions. And if you get a hold of the SISMA, you're going to get a hold of me. So that's the best way to go about that. Okay, so in Florida, we have some unique but also not unique challenges. They're just, I shouldn't even put unique challenges on here. I just put challenges, things that we have to deal with regards to invasive species that make it just really, really an uphill battle and really a huge challenge to try to manage our invasive species. So this is a list, not an extensive, not an exhaustive list. There's a couple of things I'm going to throw in here, but this is really a list of enemies, so to speak, that in the invasive plant community, things that make it hard for us to manage. And I'm not throwing shade at anyone, especially if you work in the nursery industry. I shop at nurseries and box stores all the time, but unfortunately, what happens at nurseries and box stores is that you don't always have people, one, labeling things correctly, especially with box stores. They aren't really state focused, they're regionally focused. So everything that gets decided what comes into the state of Florida to, we'll just say the big box stores, their regional offices are in Atlanta. So totally different ball game, totally different list of plants. So box stores and nurseries, they're not really the same thing, but they're kind of they're kind of different ends of the same sword. I don't think that's correct, but that's okay. The internet, in case you didn't know, you can get anything you want on the internet, literally. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, but you can get pretty much anything you want on the internet. Alternative uses. So we'll talk about this when I talk about on the next two slides, but basically when the reproductive part of that plant, so the seeds, are used for different uses, sometimes they fall through that net of, they can't be imported or they can't be bought or purchased. They, especially when people aren't calling them what their names are, there's really no oversight or regulation. Hitchhikers, so things that tag along on whether it be vehicles, clothing, animals, as you saw in that original picture of the dog covered in the burrs, but also imports. So this isn't like, think about anything being imported into the United States, but specifically think about plants being imported in. Those plants come in potting material. That potting material is not clean. It has other things that may have landed in it, especially if they've been grown outside. So you can kind of regulate what's coming in. I mean, 95% of the plants that come into the United States through imports come in through the Port of Miami. It might be actually 85, but still the vast majority come in through Port of Miami. So they have their opportunity to get established in Florida first. That assessment tool that we just talked about that was used for assessing invasiveness. So of the plants that are brought in, of the new plants, they're only able to actually screen, the customs is only able to screen about 10% of those, and the IFAS tool is only able to really assess about 10% of that 10%. So you're getting a small percentage of the plants that are being brought in actually assessed, and then you're not even taking into account all the seeds that may exist within the substrate that those plants are coming in. But it doesn't have to be plants. It can be anything that a seed can land in. And let's face it, seeds are meant to move. That's what they're there for. So they're good at it. Cultural significance. So this is one that we have a very diverse culture. We have a culturally diverse population within Florida, people coming from a lot of different places. And when those people come from other places, they bring things with them that may mean something to them, whether it's, culturally, medicinally, maybe it's just something that, is a family thing, a plant they've had for a long time, and they bring it to Florida. And surprise, surprise, it likes Florida. And then all of a sudden it becomes a problem. This plant here on the right is semi a good example of that, but I'm going to use it as a good example. The Sansevieria, or mother-in-law's tongue, or snake plant. It's a really common house plant. It has the highest oxygen turnover rate. I have it in my house sitting to the left of me right now. Unfortunately, what happens is you have people that come here from other places, other states, especially the temperate areas. They bring it down, they sit it outside, because what plant doesn't like nice sunny rain? And it just goes bonkers, and then all of a sudden it's breaking their pots. They just toss it in the backyard. And I've literally taken tons and tons and tons of this out of the understory of South Florida tropical hardwood hammocks. So, I mean, when I say tons, I'm not exaggerating. I literally mean I can think of one site that I probably took out over 2,000 pounds of biomass of this plant. So that's what I mean by plants getting moved around by people, and especially in this culturally significant way. And then finally, agriculture. I don't particularly, so it can be both things that are brought in for agriculture to be planted, but it can also just be the disruptive nature of agriculture, meaning that it's a constant ground disturbance with planting and with tilling and mowing and whatever it may be. Agriculture is a driver of invasive species. If you drive anywhere in Central Florida, if you drive around in Polk County and you look at any of the orange groves, whether they're active or not, you will see a lovely pink grass that grows underneath them. That is Natal grass, and it is everywhere. And it's a really bad invasive in that area. So these are the types of things that agriculture are kind of driving. Okay. So we talked a little bit about alternative uses. So we'll talk about Chinese tallow tree here in a minute, but it is a very bad invasive in Central Florida. It's also affectionately referred to as the popcorn tree. It has these really showy white popcorn-like seed pods that come on it. And if you look at these two wreaths, they have these beautiful white little accents on them. That is Chinese tallow. So whether they're imported as something to make a wreath or whether they're actually imported as part of the wreath, this is what I mean with things that fall under that radar of, this is a state prohibited species. It's illegal to transport, sell anything with that species. But how do you regulate this? No one's calling this Chinese tallow seeds. They're calling it decorative foliage or something like that. I imagine that it has gone through, in my mind, someone has gone through the process of actually sterilizing this, but there's no regulation over that. So another example of this is Brazilian pepper seeds, or what people refer to as red pepper berries or pink peppercorns, red peppercorns. You can actually probably buy that peppercorn mix at Publix. If you've ever bought whole or red or pink peppercorns, that is Brazilian pepper. And then also, again, wreaths, man, they're killing us. They import them, they use them as foliage, as decoration in wreaths. And again, there's really no way to oversee this. There's no way to regulate this, because again, they're not being sold as Brazilian pepper. They're not being sold as Chinese terebinthifolia seeds. They're being sold as red pepper berries. And who's to say they're not just your general run-of-the-mill red pepper berries? But in this case, those are definitely Brazilian pepper seeds. Okay, so this screen, I promise I didn't click onto my internet browser. So I pulled this up because I know for a fact that this plant is not a Central Florida plant. It's a South Florida plant. I'm sorry, but I use this one because I know that people like this plant. It's beach nampuka, half flower, scavola. It's a really common plant. It is on the Florida prohibited species list. It is a major ecosystem disruptor on those sand dunes. Pretty much if you've gone to any beach dune in South Florida, it has pretty white flowers. We do have a native scavola, so there is one that looks like it, but this particular one is actually native to Hawaii. So it's still for sale. You can still buy it at Etsy, at Amazon. I will say though, I was very pleasantly surprised that I clicked on the Amazon link and it did tell me that this item can't be shipped to my site. I was also really pleasantly surprised to see that not only was it beach nampuka, it had the correct scientific name, and that in fact is scavola. So I was like, wow, well, somebody knows their stuff. But so this one didn't fall through. But again, it has the scientific name. It has the most commonly used common name, and it cannot ship to me here in Florida. So that was a pleasant surprise, but I do not believe that is the case with most plants. Again, you can get anything on the internet. Okay, so we talked earlier about that FLEPPC list, the non-regulatory list, FLEPPC being the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, the authority on listing invasive species in the state. So just for your number recollection, and before we get into talking about individual invasive species, there are 162 total species on that list. Of those 162, 132 are listed as potentially invasive in Central Florida. So like I said, the vast majority of them are invasive here, or can be invasive here. It's only going to get worse as we start getting these warmer winters where we're not seeing the freezes. The species that really we don't get on that we don't get are going to be the tropical species that exist only in extreme South Florida or right along, or the coastal species. So that's really what we're missing out on. So we're not missing out on much. Don't worry, we get ours. So so the picture here on the right hand side, I'm going to talk about the species in a minute, but this is tropical nutrush Scalaria microcarpa. So just keep that picture in the back of your mind when we talk about that. Okay, so we're going to start out, and I'm going to have to go through these pretty fast. We're going to talk about our EDRR species that we have in Osceola County. So EDRR is early detection, rapid response. So this is to find them early and to kill them early. I will also tell you a little bit about some of our failed attempts at EDRR. But these are the species that we have listed as EDRR. If you find them on your property, or you find them on a natural area, you should alert the land manager immediately because they need to take rapid response to manage the species. Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about is Praxalis. You may find this in fields around, sort of undeveloped fields or disturbed sites where maybe development was going to happen. It is actually pretty prevalent throughout Central Florida, but in our natural areas, it is not. It grows up to about 3 feet tall. It has opposite leaves. It has these sort of ovate leaves, and the stem is very, very hairy. The leaves are very hairy. The flowers are going to be in these little clusters that are going to be sort of this light pink to baby blue, not pink, purple. Sorry, I'm giving you the wrong description. I mean, like sort of purplish to light blue. The seeds are sort of that puffball, white and fluffy. But probably the most distinguishing characteristic of this flower is it has a very unique smell, and it smells like mint with a lovely hint of cat urine. You can smell it as soon as you touch it, if you pull it, if you break a leaf off, if you don't, if you just lean down and smell it. If it doesn't smell like that, it's probably not Praxalis. It is currently a FLEPPC. I think this is actually wrong. I think it's a FLEPPC category 2. I don't believe it's a category 1 yet. But an important thing to note that we have a native plant, blue mist flower. I have it up there at the top that looks very similar to this. The biggest difference is, it has the opposite leaves. It doesn't have hairy stems. The purple's a little bit more purple. The clusters aren't quite as tight, and it absolutely does not smell like minty cat urine. So like I said, for this one, it gave us a gem of an ID, which is it has that really strong, very unpleasant smell when you touch it, when you get near it. It's terrible. So that's Praxalis. And we're going to keep moving. So again, if you have questions about these species, I think you're supposed to put it in the chat. So we'll keep going. Okay, so the picture that I just showed you guys on the initial slide was tropical nutrush. This is Scalaria microcarpa. This is a newer species here to Central Florida, although some land managers said they saw it up to 5 years ago. They just couldn't ID it because it looks like a lot of other sedges. So it's the sort of defining characters. It has winged leaves, and they're very angular. They're not going to be drooping. They're going to be very angled to the plant, like very angled. They have the M or W shape in the leaves, depending on which way you look at it. It's going to have a winged leaf sheath. So as it goes down on, you can see it here if you can see my cursor, it has this winged leaf sheath. So as it goes down around the stalk of the plant, it has a little wing on it. The seed is going to be, I wish I had a better picture of the seed. It's very unprotected, and it's bright white when it starts out green, but it gets like bright white. It looks like a little tiny pearl just sitting up there. It prefers the shade, and it loves the understory of a nice open cypress dome. Just loves it. I will say that on the preserve that I work on, we have quite a bit of this species. We have contractors coming out to manage it. The seeds float, which is great because it's a wetland species, so it just gets moved around every time there's a flooding event or not a flooding event. I don't have the picture on here, but the the researcher who first described this, who first discovered this plant, she has a great picture of when she took her boot off after getting out of the field. She had, the seeds are called achenes, and the achene was actually stuck in the tread of her boot. They're very small, but they're very hard, so they stick in there pretty well. So this plant is very easily moved around. Again, it's, if you see the species, or you think you see the species in a natural area, you should absolutely contact the manager of that property, the land manager, because this is a species that we think we may have a chance to keep isolated to our region, and not share it with the rest of the state. But again, that really takes vigilance on the part of people being out there. This next species, I have issues with it being on our EDRR list. I think it's probably much more widespread than we believe it is. And I think part of the reason that we don't believe it's more widespread is just because grasses are not easy to ID. This is paraggrass or paragrass, however you prefer to do your inflection. It's a grass up to about 3 feet tall. The leaf blades are flat, smooth, often with really fine hairs on them. The leaf sheaths have dense, stiff hairs right below them. So when you look, so this is going to be the leaf sheath here. So you're going to find those like dense hairs right below there. The inflorescence is going to be terminal, so it's at the top of the plant. So it puts up a spike, and it's going to be sort of clustery, Christmas tree shape, but very. The seeds are going to be droopy. It's not going to be tightly clustered. And it's originally native to Africa, so probably a very nice tropical part of Africa. And this is a FLEPPC category 1. But again, one of the problems with grasses is that they're just incredibly hard to ID. And I don't know if you know this, we have a lot of grasses in our Florida natural areas. So they're not the easiest group of species for people to become familiar with IDing. So again, if you see paraggrass, or you think you see paraggrass in a natural area, or you have land that you're managing and you have paraggrass, I recommend taking care of that plant. I'm not giving it, so I will say this, I'm not giving any treatment recommendations today. If you're interested in treatment recommendations, I recommend that you reference the University of Florida's Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants. They're sort of the authority on treatment recommendations, and those would be the recommendations I'd be giving you anyways. So you can find information on all of these plants on UF's website. So there's my disclaimer for that. Okay, so our final EDRR species is Coral ardesia. This is a species that is well known throughout Florida. It's fairly new to the area. The biggest concern about this species is it's toxic to livestock, and for some reason it just happens to love growing in cow fields. So it's a shrub. It can get up to about 6 feet tall. It is a very pretty shrub. It has these dark green leaves with these crenate margins, so that it's very pretty. It's a very nice, would be like a beautiful ornamental. That is not me promoting this plant. I'm just saying that's what it was brought in for. The flowers are going to be white or pink, and they're going to be in these sort of axillary clusters that grow at the end of the little stalks. The berries are bright red, and they droop, and they are persistent pretty much throughout the entire year. But the thing about this species, the most identifiable part of the species is going to be this sort of this leaf margin. What they call it scalloped, or crenate is why it's crenata, is that leaf edge. We don't have any other native species that have that sort of leaf margin, at least not as defined as this one. So if you see this, a lot of times you're going to see it as a slightly smaller shrub, but again, it likes the sort of shady areas around hammocks and things like that. If you see this species, again, let the land managers know we want to get this taken care of. If you see it in a cattle field, find someone to tell, because it can kill their cows. And I think people would appreciate not having their cows killed. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of our priority species. Some of these may be familiar to you, some of them may not. But if you have any interest in plants, you've probably at least heard some of these names somewhere along the way. But I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to go a little quickly. So if you have questions, again, email the chat. So Kogan grass, this is a very prevalent grass in Central Florida. It's bright green, and it grows along most of our roadways, unfortunately. It says it's a grass up to 4 feet tall. I was actually working with some Kogan grass today that was about 6.5 feet tall, but on average, about 4 feet is pretty normal. But if it has something to give it some structure, it'll grow significantly taller. It's light green to yellow. It's sort of this this sort of neon green color that, especially if you get it in the right, bright light, just it almost like illuminates it. It's very easy to see when you get the right light. The leaves have an off-center midrib, again, a defining characteristic of this plant. If you look at the leaf, you're going to see the midrib just slightly off to one side or the other. If you have a question about it, fold it in half, and if they don't meet up, you probably have Kogan grass. The leaves are also going to be significantly wider than a lot of other, I shouldn't say that. They're pretty wide. I won't say they're wider than other. We have plenty of other wide, broad-leaved grasses. Their inflorescence is going to be this sort of Q-tip-esque stalk. It's going to be very white, and it's going to be at the top. They can get fairly big. They're silky. They're attractive, and they get rather large. And you're going to see those probably around like December through like the early winters. So like December through like March is when you're going to see the stalks out. And this is a FLEPPC category 1. And we have the species bad in Florida. Alabama has this species bad, bad, bad. This is a prohibited species. You cannot, as you said, you can't sell it, you can't import it, you can't move it. When I send in seed heads to get tested for viability, I have to get special waivers and include them in there, and then note on it that this is a prohibited species that I'm shipping. So there's a lot of regulations around the species just because it is so aggressive. The other thing that they're seeing with these warmer winters that we're seeing, not just in Florida, but outside of Florida, you're seeing the species make a gradual move north, and they're seeing it in places they've never seen it before. So a lot of places are learning from our problems here in the Southeast and are really trying hard to get this species, prevent this species from becoming a problem. Okay, air potato. Most people have heard of air potato. It has, it's a very aggressive vine that we have in Florida. It has these heart-shaped leaves that can get up. I mean, they can get huge. I saw one the other day that I swear was like this big. Their stems get up to 65 feet long. They grow up into the tops of trees. They grow over shrubs. They grow on the ground. They grow on your fences. Anywhere that they can get structure to grow on, they're going to grow on. One of the defining characteristics of this plant is that, as you can see here, all of the veins on the leaves originate from a single point. One of the things that get commonly mistaken for this are some of our morning glory species, but that is going to have a single mid vein down the middle with all of the veins coming off of that. Air potato does not have that. They have flowers sometimes, but they're very rare. I've only seen them a handful of times in Florida. They're going to be white-ish yellow, and they sort of hang. You can see sort of here from where the leaves originate. They're going to kind of hang from there. But again, they're not very prevalent in Florida just because the species isn't heavily pollinated here. The fruits are going to be a defining characteristic. They have these big aerial bulbils that look like potatoes, hence where the name air potato comes from. And they can be anything from, this big to this big. And that is really, that's where the plant's going to die back in the wintertime, drop those bulbils in the spring. They're just going to go crazy again. Part of the reason that this is also a prohibited species, by the way, you can see it says red and bright red, prohibited. So this species is a category 1, and this is probably one of the only species that we can say we've actually had a very well, not really, not the only species. We have a very successful biocontrol for the species. I do not know how to pronounce the scientific name, so I'm going to just tell you they call it the air potato beetle. If you have air potato and you want some air potato beetles, do not buy them off Amazon for $1 a beetle. You can get them through your local extension services for free. You just call them, they'll get a hold of UF, and they will send them to you. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, call me. I will hook you up with air potato beetles. I will get you in touch with the right people. So we have been that biocontrol was incredibly successful. It's also a really cool, showy, big bug that kind of looks like a ladybug. So that's the story of air potato. Okay, Japanese climbing fern. So I'm gonna click this, and then I'm gonna toggle through to its cousin. Nope, toggling the wrong way. So we have old world climbing fern and we have Japanese climbing fern. Okay, these are cousins. They're both prohibited and they're both terrible. It's a true fern. It is also a vine. I actually had someone post a picture of this online. They're like, is this, not sure if this is a fern or a vine. What is it? And it's like, well, actually, you're not wrong because it is a fern and a vine. So we'll talk about Japanese climbing first, Lygodium japonicum. I don't even know what to say about them. So the leaflets are going to be lobed. They're going to have, so if you look over here, and when we switch to the next one, you'll see the difference. So they have sort of this tri-lobe type thing. They've got like little fingers on the side and then a big one in the middle. A lot of people say it looks like it's giving you the finger, which is sort of how you can tell the difference between japonicum and microphyllum. And again, this is a true, so this is going to be a non-fertile frond. This is a true fern, so it doesn't put out seeds, it puts out spores. So this little feathery looking thing down here is what the fertile fronds look like. And each of these, so this structure here is a leaf. This is going to be your leaflet. This is the rachis right here in the middle. And each of these little leaflets that you see here, which you can't really tell, but they're about the size of like maybe a thumbnail on me, those can each put up 20,000 spores. So they're incredibly prolific. They are spread by wind, water, you walking through them, your dog walking through them, a hog walking through them. They're incredibly prolific. So this species, to give you guys some nightmares, is started in the north part of Florida, and it's sort of just tromping its way down south. Okay, so now let's talk about its cousin. That's not its cousin. That's its cousin. Old world climbing fern. So this species looks different. It doesn't have that lobed, it's just a singular little leaflet. So again, this whole structure is a leaf. These are going to be the leaflets. And they have these sort of, the thing that's hard about Lygodium is that the leaves never look like this. They always look, they have a very big diversity of leaf shape and the way that they look, but they're always going to have these entire margins. They're going to have what would be sort of like the stem, which they call the rachis, is going to be very delicate. There's not a lot of structure there. And it's very prolific. So this species, to give you guys some nightmares, started in South Florida, down in the Everglades and somewhere near Jonathan Dickinson State Park, and it is doing this. So its cousin is coming this way, and it's coming this way. And if I'm Central Florida here, they're just kind of doing this. And unfortunately, we do have both of them in Central Florida. So far, they haven't seen any cases of hybridization, but these species are both they're both Lygodiums, so there is always a chance they could hybridize. We're just kind of like, please don't. This again is a prohibited species. It's a FLEPPC category 1, and this species right here is currently considered the number one, actually I think it's the number 2 threat to Florida's ecosystems, number 1 being development, but this species being number 2. So the problem with Lygodium is that, I wish I had a better picture, and I don't think I have one later on. It covers the tops of tree canopies, and it does a couple things. One, it acts as a fire ladder. We have a ton of fire in Florida. Our fires are meant to be ground fires, fast moving, low intensity, but this basically likes to light on fire. So you send your nice fast moving ground fire, and all of a sudden it hits Lygodium, whoop, you got a crown fire and you're killing your trees. So that's one of the problems with it. Another problem is that since it grows over the tops of these trees, it can crush your canopy. So it changes the structure, your canopy structure, basically destroying your entire ecosystem. And then I had one more thing that it did, and now I can't remember. This is bad. Just trust me, it's bad. Oh yeah, it doesn't like to grow in easy to get to places. That was the third thing. So while a lot of these plants that I showed you like to grow in, along fence lines or in fields or in our flatwoods, this one grows pretty much anywhere it can, and it specifically likes deep, dark, hard to reach wetlands. So I've spent a lot of time in gator infested swamps up to my waist looking for this plant, and not the best place to spend your time. So anyways, that's Lygodium. It's terrible. That's the best thing to say about it. Chinese tallow tree, or popcorn tree. I talked about this when I talked about those wreaths with the flowers on them that get imported. So again, this is a prohibited species, and that's where these seeds are coming from. It's a dioecious tree up to 50 feet. The thing people like about it is that it's dioecious, so it changes colors in the winter time, in the fall. So we get some fall foliage. It's been around here for a long time. It really likes to grow in wet areas. It also likes sort of well-drained uplands. It runs the whole gamut, but it really likes ditches. So if you see a ditch and you see some nice, pretty, attractive fall coloring, it's probably going to be this tree. It has a semi-unique leaf shape. It's these ones not so much, but it has sort of a almost it's just kind of a unique leaf shape, and they when you see them they kind of stand out in the landscape because there's not really another tree that has kind of this leaf shape. um, it has it puts out these attractive white seeds, as I showed you. Birds love them. Oh, birds love everything. And they also float, so I told you it likes to go and grow in drainage ditches, so they flood and all of a sudden the seeds get moved down the way. Excuse me a second, my nose was running. um, and then finally, I haven't talked about this yet, but a lot of our invasive species do this. I should put this one first. So this species and Kogan grass so far is the other one we've talked about that does this. It releases a toxin into the soil and it actually changes the soil chemistry to prevent the establishment of other species. So it makes it great for itself and other invasives, but basically it prevents other species that can't live in that environment from germinating. So essentially creating its own perfect little habitat. And that's actually a really common theme amongst lots of our invasive species. It's called being alleliopathic. It's great. Okay, so Brazilian pepper tree, another one of these alleliopathic species, another prohibited species, another massive problem in the state of Florida. Um, and another thing that's great about it, it's related to poison ivy. So if you're super allergic to poison ivy, you're probably allergic to this plant. We talked about this species earlier when I showed you the pictures of the red peppercorns. You can see the seeds down here, maybe they're bright red. Those are going to be the seeds that are going to be sold as pink peppercorns. This is a large shrub or small tree up to 30 feet. I've seen them sprawl out to take up over a ½ acre of land. They're very prolific. They're very large. They have these alternate pinnately compound 3 to 9 leaflets. So like this is going to be a leaf. These are going to be your leaflets. It has small little clusters of white flowers, but the most commonly identifiable feature on this plant is going to be its very showy bright red berries that come out around Christmas time, which give this plant its other common name, which a lot of people don't like me to tell you, but I'm going to tell you anyways. It is called Florida holly. And the way that this species actually got here was because it was brought in as a landscape plant, because in South Florida, they don't have native holly. And when folks like myself who are escaping the cold and move down here from Ohio and don't want to, and they still want to see their lovely holly at Christmas time, in comes Brazilian pepper. It's salt tolerant. I've seen this plant literally growing in canals in South Florida. It grows everywhere from the coast all the way to our uplands. It is fire resistant. Once it gets to a certain size, fire will control the species when it's small. But and if you do have a really frequent burn return interval, it will control the species. But if you let it go more than 4 or 5 years, it will not control the species. It will prevent fire from getting in those areas. The one good thing about this is the main control method of this plant, which is an herbicide called triclopyr. You can pretty much show it the bottle and it will wilt. So that is the one thing it's got going for it. But it is a large tree. It's a lot of biomass, can be very hard to manage, especially because they form dense monocultures that you have to sort of crawl/swim through to get to the base. And then again, it's related to poison ivy, so then you get a rash, which is always great. Oh, I guess that's the last species that I had on here. So if anyone has any questions, we can, I think I'm going to get access to those questions and I will try and answer them. No questions so far. Comments? Okay. So mostly just comments, so we can skip those, but unless there's anything that is added to any comments that need to be added to my talk. Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Well, we'll just finish it up then. And I don't know why my screen is all weird here at the end, but Thank you to the folks that are our partners in this. So again, the Osceola SISMA, which is the Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. If you would like to join that, we meet the second Wednesday of every other month starting in January. So January, March, May, July, September, November, second Wednesday. And normally we meet at the Extension Services building, but we're meeting remotely right now. So if you're interested, you can get a hold of me. And then I will also say that the one thing I did not mention on this talk, and I wish I would have, if you want to report invasive species and you don't know how to get a hold of a land manager, you can use the I've Got One app, IVE Got One. You can download it. It's super easy to use, and that reports directly to we land managers throughout the state get access to that. So report, report, report. So with that, I think I'm done.